Hello, my name is Ivan, and I'm going to talk about my grandfather Chinua Achebe. He was born in Nigeria in 1930. He is a Nigerian writer known worldwide for his impact in the world of African literature and passion seen through his books towards the African culture. I feel it is very important to talk about my grandfather and his novel. Also discuss it with other two participants of the interview because I have so much things to learn from them and I'm really interested in their opinions about the grandfather's authors, who has been using different languages in different purposes. So today I want to talk about extract from Chinua Achebe novel Things Fall Apart. I think in this novel, Chinua Achebe has developed the theme of how language influences people's identity and how people struggle when they're using second language and mother tongue at the same time. There is very important idea that people who are learning new language should not forget their mother tongue and their culture. So when I was young, I was really lazy to read the poem and my grandfather told me the context of his novel. So the main character has been very respected person in his country, but after he had made a murder and he was exiled from the country, after he went back, he noticed that everything has been changed because of the colonization, and he is not important anymore to people of the country. I think the context brings very clear idea that people can use English to speak, but they shouldn't betray their national language and they should understand that national language is the most important thing which shapes your identity. The one important thing which I want to talk about is the purpose and how audience shapes the structure of the text. I think the target audience is all people who can speak English because the novel was written in English in a purpose to reach a wider audience and people who are struggling because of using national and second language. Struggling with expression of their emotions and also for African people who have different dialect, so reading in English they can understand it. Description of suffering and obstacles is described in the novel to tell people more about African culture and lifestyle, so people will get into it. He was using inclusive language to reach English speaking audience. My grandfather was telling me all the time when I was young, the African writer should aim to use English in a way that brings out his message best without altering the language to the extent that its value of international exchange will be lost. I want to point it out that my grandfather used one sentence which describes his love to the mother tongue. His love of talk had grown with age and thickness. It means that as he was growing up, he liked speaking national language more and more, so he was attracted to it. He felt that he need to talk as much as he can because he was getting older, his life was coming to the end, and there was lots of ideas about language and identity which exist only in his mind. He wanted to share with people how do his thoughts have changed over the time, and as he was getting older he was getting more proofs of his idea and knowledge which he wanted to share. Chinua Achebe also said once, "What I do see is a new voice coming out of Africa speaking of African experience in a worldwide language." My point of view on his saying is that people in Africa should feel free to talk about their culture and country, but they should use different worldwide language to reach wider audience. In his novel, he has described how hard was the African life. Since I survived that year, he always said, I shall survive anything. My grandpa believes that Africa should write about their life and experience, express their emotions on the paper. There is nothing bad if they will write on the different language since writing are still about Africa and their culture. My grandpa believed that people who are struggling with learning and using different language will not betray their national language. Can he ever learn to use like native speaker? I should say I hope not. It is the words of my grandpa. People express their real feelings using national language. Someone see a magical power in it, some people understand that it is the most significant language which cannot be replaced by different language or culture. Also, there is an opinion that some people and some languages can express the same ideas but using different words and meanings. So the style and language is different, but it's still possible to use to create something great. In his novel, Chinua Achebe describes the all small details of the Africa lifestyle. He had described rain as something magnificent. Here is a quote: "But the year had gone mad. Rain fell as it had never fallen before. For days and nights together it pours down in violent torrents and washed away the young hips. He explained it to me when I was younger. He did it because he wanted to include as many details about Africa as he can, so people read it can feel the atmosphere of African culture and life. It is one of the purposes of his writings. Also, he used fair and in his descriptions and hyperbole so people will remember the description and how were the real conditions. It was really great experience for me to come and talk about our grandfathers with two other people who have quite familiar experience and very interesting thoughts. I could not imagine that there are so many common things between us and our grandfathers, their ideas. I am really glad that I have told my opinion about this theme to people. It was very important for me, so people will know who was my grandpa, Chinua Achebe. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Nathan, the grandson of the late Seamus Heaney. It's a pleasure to be invited over and share with everyone the story about my beloved grandfather, Seamus Heaney. For me, not only that he's a very good writer and poet, he's also a very good and understanding grandfather. He always taught us how to write beautifully with our feelings and experiences. My grandfather had always been very passionate in writings. I still remember his collection of books. It was like a huge pile of books, either in English or Irish. Talking about language, my grandfather was born Irish and he speaks Irish throughout his entire life. But as he grew older, he learned to speak English and he actually went to an English school. He's a very cautious person about language, as he always told us to always remember our mother language, which is Irish. And yeah, he always reminded us to speak Irish at home. His main reason was that he didn't want us to forget about Irish, since it is the main identity of our life. I can say that my grandfather is a bit of a different person when he's speaking in English, rather than when he speaks in Irish in our family. This identity problem had always been one of the most discussed topic in our family, since our grandfather didn't really want any of us to be dragged into the same problem as him. So we were told to always use both of our language so that we can be like the same person in identity. The problem about this was that it's quite difficult for someone to have the exact same identity in both language, because one might be a lot more comfortable in another language. My grandfather also believed that it is indeed not possible for someone to have the exact same identity in both languages they speak, but he wanted us to try our best either way, just so we can be equally comfortable in both language. He once said that it was also a big problem for him to be able to write, speak, and do his job in English, since he wasn't able to fully express his feelings and thoughts. It's like a painting on a canvas, but only with one color. Everything is unclear and repetitive. He said that he was way more comfortable talking and working in Irish than English. I personally came from an Irish family, and at home we always speak Irish. So even up until now, we speak Irish inside the house. Like to my brothers, to my sisters, and to my mom and dad. My grandfather's artwork almost always sounds gloomy and sad. His words and phrases are saddening. I think his style of writing were affected by his experiences and his personality as a person. I know that my grandfather has been through quite a lot in his life, like he went through many deaths of relatives and friends. So here I brought an example of my grandfather's artwork. The poem is called Midterm Break. It sounds like I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. In the porch, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride, and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in, and I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest, away at school as my mother held my hand. In hers and coughed out angry tearless sighs. At 10 o'clock the ambulance arrived, with the corpse stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. I saw him, for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now. Wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple, he lay in the 4-foot box as in his cot. No gaudy scars, the bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box, a foot for every year. That's a poem about the death of his relatives. It was a kid, actually, like one of his relatives' children. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And I'm so also very happy to be able to meet 3 other grandsons of the kind of influential writers. So thank you and see you later.
Hello everyone, my name is Mugoma Wangugi, and I am the grandson of famous Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o. It's an honor to be invited here by such an influential magazine and meet all these descendants of famous bilingual writers. My goal here is to share the history of my grandfather, his works, his thoughts about how language is important to people, and to learn new points of view about the language importance from other grandsons. My grandfather was born in Kenya, and all his life he respects the language of his homeland, Gikuyu, and tries not to lose the connections with it. In his famous text, The Language of African Literature, from collection of 4 essays called Decolonizing the Mind, grandfather wrote about him being forced to learn English and how hard it was not to lose connections with Gikuyu, to show that people should not forget and betray their own culture and native language even when they are forced to do so. The first novel that made my grandfather famous and more influential author was written in his native language. Gikuyu language was spoken in the fields, in and outside his home. In the evenings, people gathered around the fireside and told many interesting stories. The whole nation was playing with language through riddles, proverbs, transpositions of syllables, and other games. But after my grandfather went to colonial school, this language harmony was broken. Englishmen declared a state of emergency over Kenya, and English became a formal language of education. Children couldn't speak their native language in the school anymore because they were punished for speaking Gikuyu. On the other side, students who spoke English and got good marks for English had more respect and even better opportunities to enter elite university. For my grandfather and the whole population in general, it was a hard time to be forced to adopt a foreign language and pretend as it was their native. Granddad had a lot of thoughts and feelings on this topic, as well as anger, so he decided to put all his emotions and thoughts on the paper because that would allow people to raise an awareness and let people understand what it feels like. My grandfather understood that English is a worldwide language and he couldn't reach enough audience with only Gikuyu language. So he started writing his works in English. The first novel in English is Weep Not Child, and still my grandfather continues to write in English. Grandfather divided his essay, The Language of African Literature, into 9 sections, and in each section he made reader think about different aspects of his text. In first section he highlighted 3 points of African literature: imperialism and resistance to imperialism, decolonization and self-determination. He put language in the center of the discussion and made it the main thing readers should focus on. In the second section, Grandpa used his own life experience about the African writers conference to discuss what African literature is or could be while accepting that it must be in English. In the third section, he wrote about his early childhood experience and differences between speaking Gikuyu and English. Granddad contrasted his village lessons of Gikuyu language in the field or at home and the experience of speaking English in the colonial schools. Fourth section is the section about the relationship between language and human culture. He firstly divided language into 2 characters: means of communication and way to express culture. Then Granddad divided communication into 3 other aspects: language of real life, speech and writing, and those are 3 ways how people use language to communicate. He noted that language forms culture. It is a big memory of people's experience in history of each country. In 5th section, my grandfather described how colonialists forced children to use only foreign language as a way of communication. They divorced children from their home language in the school, breaking harmony between spoken and written. For children, learning at school became only must-do subject, not the emotionally felt experience. Section 6 described how useful was the English literature for bourgeois class of the nation. English literature created an English-speaking African bourgeois society which refused African language and wanted independence. This literature helping them, though never connected with people. In section 7, Grandfather wrote that people didn't give up and continued to carry their home language, keeping it alive. They raised their own writers and singers. Some people from bourgeois class even changed their minds and joined people who supported African literature. Grandfather, in the 8th section, blamed all those African writers who were fighting against English literature but continued to write their texts in English. He didn't support the African literature in any means because people were not fighting, and the literature that was created should be called African European literature, not the African literature. In this final section of the language of African literature, Granddad detailed his switch from 17-year writing in African European tradition to writing in his mother tongue Gikuyu. He understood that writers are very important towards creating their homeland culture and literature because through their works they open language for the whole nation. They change people's minds and carry the anti-imperialism context. Thank you everyone again for inviting me here, and I hope I could reach, if not every reader's mind, but most part of them with my grandfather's thoughts about language importance for people, their identity and culture of homeland. I want also thank Ivan and Nathan for sharing their grandfather's stories about points of view about native language. Today I learned a lot of new information and very impressive how similar were the thoughts of our granddads. Good luck everyone, and never forget the culture of the place where you are from.